now I'll start on the second set of stories related to becoming a specialized transitional minister. And these are more about the training piece and the vetting that our denomination did at the time, and one story about starting in my first, a couple stories about starting in my first contract. So I applied to become a specialized transitional minister. Somehow, I don't remember how, I heard that this was being started up again. It had been done earlier in the denomination's history with 3 or 4 people who were pastors that became denominational employees who did this work, but that turned out to be too expensive when they were between contracts. So now an STM is an independent contractor. But I had to do a vetting interview with Dwayne Visser, he was, I think, out of the pastoral church relations, it was called, office at that time. But he still did the kind of the interview where people who were thinking of becoming specialized transitional ministers had a conversation, a 1-hour conversation with him for that position. And so here I'll insert a caveat that I've seen happen a number of times. A lot of ministers at that time, particularly, just thought this would be a cool gig to do in retirement or semi-retirement. And it is true that certainly early on, a number of the pastors doing it were, or at least in the second phase, were semi-retired or retired. But it's not for everyone. It is actually a completely different approach to ministry in the church. The called minister has to think long term and has to do more appeasing of people than the STM has time for. One of the huge differences is that the specialized transitional minister does not have time to build up some trust equity, as I call it, in a congregation, but needs to, about 3 months in, really get down to the work, and there won't have been time for that trust building. So they're different, and that's why there's a vetting process. I don't know what's done these days, but that's why there's a need to have a conversation about what are you aiming for in this. And you need to understand the concepts and the theories, like systems and emotional systems is one of the latest ones I've learned about. You need to have some knowledge of that, and you need to be a person who has some pretty good self-awareness, or it'll be hard to be effective in this role. So I had to have this interview with Dwayne Visser. I'd met him once before for some other reason. And so I'm in Vancouver Island, and we get on the phone, and a little bit of chit chat, and then he says, "I see that you've served," I won't name the congregation, but one particular congregation twice in your lifetime. And then he says, "Do you consider yourself reasonably well adjusted emotionally?" Like those two together. I don't know exactly if that was his exact words, but it was like that. I mean, I'm interviewing. I was severely underemployed. Let's put it that way at that point. So I'm hoping to get the job, but how do you answer a question like that? And it's related to having served twice in this one congregation. And so I said, sometimes I wonder about that myself. And he chuckled. If you knew him at all, it was kind of, he had a unique kind of one of those deeper chuckles. And then he said, the reason I asked that is because this congregation that you served at twice has been on the radar of Pastor Church Resources from the day it was formed, and we've never been able to resolve what's going on there to this point. And so for someone to actually choose to go back there once they'd been there before, it was just surprising. This was a few minutes into the conversation, and I already knew at that point, I could sense by the way the thing shifted that I was going to be approved. So we had some conversation beyond that. And but it was really, it's one of those anxious points of what do I say now? I tend to always, I've taken in my day a few courses on resume writing and things like that. With some of the government programs here in the U.S., when you're unemployed, those are offered for free, and I try and trying to teach the instructors in these courses who are very much into airbrushing and emphasizing the positive, that as a pastor, if you're going to apply for a position with any integrity, you can't just airbrush everything. So uh, at that point, I was approved then for the first dose of training from the Interim Ministry Network. And I know I flew to somewhere in the States. It might have been Chicago, north of Chicago, or something like that, to take this. It's kind of interesting because there's no time for anything but your hotel room and the courses, so it doesn't really matter where you are. And that was an interesting experience in the broadness of that education. The education had value, and the booklets that I received that were outlining the material that we were given. I think the first one is on the work of the congregation, and then the second one is on the work of the transitional minister. But I referred back to those often. I think I've even scanned and retyped some of the notes so that I can just quickly reference them sometimes when I need to. But it was interesting in the sense that this training had an older male leader, and whatever he was doing, he was teaching about staying unmoved by agitation in the congregation. He spoke about that a lot, but as every time he spoke, he dropped little things that sounded misogynistic, and so each segment, the more feminist leaning and maybe mainstream female pastors who were taking the course, there were about 30 people, I think, at the time, were getting more and more upset. And he was cool as a cucumber in the face of that. Their questions of what he was presenting as a teacher were getting more and more aggressive, and he just carried on. And I thought, wow, he's really demonstrating this concept well. Later on, officials from IMN apparently certainly called me and asked about my experience of it. And as far as I know, the man never, even though he's got some great books out there, the man never was put into a classroom again on their behalf. The second training that I took also had a diverse participation, and that's kind of a downside of it because it creates some conflict around that. And yes, we're grown-ups and we need to learn to work with that, but my second training, I believe it was the second one, had a rabbi, a very strict kind of Southern Baptist pastor, and a lady who led our meal prayer praying to Mother Earth, right? So which created some tension. The instructors in that one were really good, and the material and their stories of the experience, which is partly encouraging me to put my experiences kind of on the record, because I know for me, you can give me a concept, but if you illustrate it with a story, that really helps me. So I took the training. The second one I actually did while I was at my first contract. Next story is what I call preaching for a contract. So here I was on Vancouver Island, and I was part of a men's Bible study group, and we had a special prayer time for me before I went. A church in the U.S. invited me to come and preach for them because they were considering, I think they were for their own reasons, they were considering an STM. The last ending of their pastor had been a bad ending, and so they had myself and another person they were talking to. So they were going to fly me in, and my group, after praying with me over the situation, their conviction was I should be who I really was, and what that meant was don't pack a suit and a tie. Just to get the job. Don't wear a suit and tie just to get the job. and be authentic. And so with that, flew out there. It was in the colder months of the year, and they put me up in a hotel, which as an introvert I appreciated, because it makes these things extra tiring as an introvert if you're in someone's house and they want to talk all the time and you can't get away. But what I did was, for the first time in my life, I'd been in ministry, yeah, 14 years or something like that. I got, the morning service went fine. Um, and I also deliberately chose some of my more provocative sermons to preach, just again to let them know who I was. And but Sunday night, I had the time of the worship service beginning wrong, and I showed up 15 minutes late. Um, Elders were panicking. One was searching the council room for that booklet where there are sermons that they could read. Several of them had concluded that whatever happened in the morning, I decided I wasn't coming there, and so I just wasn't going to show up. And as I walk in and realize that I'm late, I'm thinking there's no way they're going to invite me to be their STM. I mean, who gets the time of the service wrong when they're preaching for a contract or for a call, for that matter? So I had, in that recognition, I kind of resigned to the idea of getting there. We had still meetings, I think, on Monday night, and then on Tuesday morning I was flying back out. So I got up on the pulpit and I did what is authentically me. I said, I'm sorry, that has never happened to me before. I know I could tell you anything, but it hasn't happened to me before. I feel really bad. Thank you for, singing a few extra hymns while you were waiting and while the elders were panicking. But I just need to say, I hope it doesn't disrupt our worship experience beyond this point, and I'm sorry. And then I preached and I had the meeting on the Monday night, but I was already in a mode of like, this isn't going to happen. Well, it turns out, and so the illustration in this is that this being authentic, and in a later story I'll talk about times when I've messed up. When I go home from a meeting or a service and I'm looking for my suitcase because I'm sure they're going to send me home, how it ends up being a breakthrough in a way I couldn't imagine. So something similar to that happened here, where one of the problems with the previous pastor was that he never apologized for anything, even when he was clearly wrong. He never apologized for anything. So this mess up and apologizing was, for many in the congregation, a complete breath of fresh air. I heard it from several people when I eventually got there and started visiting in households. So that's an important story. That's significant. To bring that authenticity to the situation, and then let God work beyond that, even if you mess up. And being authentic and not lying or covering up or blame shifting when something goes wrong can be refreshing for the people. Now, it also helped that the other guy backed out. Okay, but it made a certain number of people fairly positive about me coming. This one apology. I never heard about anything else that impressed them in those visits. So that's the third point under this. So they extended the invitation to come, and I started making preparations. And I have an allergy, severe anxiety around filling out forms. They go back to my student loan days, and basically still today, any form that I have to fill out is a major obstacle for me. And this form to go work in the U.S. Was a 31-page form. And I went over it multiple times, and I even phoned two government agencies that were about Canadian government agencies that were about crossing the border to go to work, and I was kind of annoying probably in that, and they told me, you're good to go. So I get I abandoned my place on Vancouver Island and the small position I had there, 80 acres of oceanfront wilderness. I had a free house and $1,000 a month, and I was the caretaker of that 80 acres for that money. Um, Pack a U-Haul, go to southern Alberta to visit family down there and then go for the border. And at the border, giving my paperwork, I'm driving a U-Haul, pulling my car on a wagon behind, and I get turned away. There was one box on those 31 pages that was not checked on the church's end of the paperwork. They had done a batch of paperwork as well. And that one box was that Homeland Security had not been to the church to check out whether it actually existed and whether it had the money to actually pay me. And so I was stuck, homeless and unemployed for 3 months, waiting to cross the border to take this contract where I was going to re-enter ministry. The fellows from the States, a rural area, had some fun stories to tell of when the Homeland Security agent came, but that's a story for another time. Then that was a hardship as well, right? 3 months unemployed. But I put out some emails and I got to work for 6 weeks in one church in that area that was waiting for their new pastor to come. And I then 6 weeks in another church after that. So the way I say it is, in God's providence, my checking account was just as overdrawn at the end of those 3 months as it was at the beginning. So that's providence. So, and in working in those churches, having had the first course already, I could kind of practice observing things, and both of them also were churches with problems. Again, I won't go into detail on that, but it was very, very eye-opening to kind of practice some of the observational stuff without having a responsibility to interfere. Neither pastorate of both of the churches were waiting for a new pastor, and neither of those pastorates lasted very long, which was foreseeable when I helped out for the weeks that they were waiting for their new pastor to arrive. That's rough to be able to see that coming, and then you'd think it was an affirming thing to hear a couple of years later that turned into an Article 17 or that there was big trouble or whatever. It's not a pleasant feeling at all. And so that started for me this urgency of trying to figure out how to prevent hard partings, so to speak. Then the last piece of this one, the last story there is, and this was fun to tell when I was a new STM and we were in our circles, and I have pictures of some of the evidence of this. But one of the things I had remembered from my training was that when you first arrive, you are not part of the system yet. And so you will notice things if you have your eyes open. You will notice systemic things that are normal to everyone there, but that are actually unusual. In a US church, the American flag beside the pulpit, that was to me unusual. And I made the mistake of just asking innocent questions about why it was there. Whoa, another story. So after I got the permission, I arrive on the site. The parsonage is next to the church. Pull up with my U-Haul. I let my dog out. We walk around a little bit, and I took a few things out of the U-Haul, started bringing them in the house, and I noticed that a fellow across the street is kind of being conspicuous, I'm going to say, out in his front yard, picking up blades of grass, kind of like just doing things that weren't really things in his front yard. And so I thought, maybe he wants to just say hi, or maybe I should go say hi since I'm going to be the new pastor of this church here. So I go and talk to this person, and He tells me about how the church was good to him and his wife 3 years before when she had pancreatic cancer, I believe, and how they would bring meals and things like that. And then he said that his relationship with the church, he wasn't going there right now, and his relationship with the church hadn't always been very good. And he told me about some 10 years before that when the church had an event going on, an outdoor event, and he said I forget, he was mowing the lawn, and so a man in a three-piece suit came over like he owned the area and told me to turn the lawnmower off because they couldn't hear. And so I got my wife to start mowing the lawn, and I started tuning my motorcycle. That's the story he told me, something like that. So, but over time, I noticed a couple of interesting things. He had painted fingernails. He had the physique of a person who's worked outside all his life. So tanned face, weathered face. He had a tan, but he had painted fingernails. I thought, okay, well, whatever. And then over time, I started noticing that he was actually wearing a bra, and yet his voice was male and all those kinds of things. So then he drops when things are getting too friendly. Then he drops on me that he's transitioning to being a female, and the way he did it, I don't remember it exactly, but I knew that he was trying to be provocative, and he was fully expecting me to end the conversation at that point, and nice seeing you, nice meeting you, and walk away. But instead, I got curious about what that journey was like, and so in my time there, we had a couple of conversations. But the point of this story is that this was the first person that I encountered in a rural CRC church in Midwestern US, and he was a male who was transitioning to being a female. The first person I meet. And I walk away from that when the conversation did end. It's like, Lord, what does this mean? Right? I'm a specialized transitional minister, but of a different kind. So went back to the house, and there was a guy at the house from the building committee, and he pulled up kind of as the conversation finished, and so said hello to him. And he said, "Yeah, I'm here to replace the toilet seat in the main bathroom." And I said, "Well, go ahead, And then I followed him in, and yeah, the existing one was cracked in a place where well, let's just say it would be dangerous for males to sit or to get up from it in a hurry. And so he replaced it. And when I first went to use it after it, I flipped the lid up. The brand name of the toilet seat was Church, Easy, Clean, and Change. I have a picture of it on the site. And I was laughing so hard I didn't remember why I came into the room. It was just so hilarious. Church, Easy, Clean, and Change. So that was incident number 2 within 24 hours of getting there. The next morning, I decide to take my dog for a walk. There's kind of a woods a short distance away. And as I'm walking across the parking lot, and I also knew it would get warm, so I went early-ish in the day, I noticed these birds in this dead tree at the edge of the woods, right kitty corner to the parking lot of the church. And I'm reading, I'm looking around, what kind of a place is this, and all this kind of stuff. And as I get closer, I realize these are vultures. And then I made the mistake of counting. Vultures are a sign of death in just about every culture. They're waiting for something to die so they can gorge on it. They're kitty corner to the church. There were 13 of them. It doesn't quite show on the picture, but I counted. Well, I just about packed my stuff back in the U-Haul and went home, right? So, and I'm asking God, what does this mean, right? I'm trying to be observant about the system as I get there, and those are the first 3 instances. So they make fun stories, but it's part of a way of telling people that are STMs that in those, I think the teaching is the first 3 months. By 3 months, you usually become part of the system and you don't realize what's unusual anymore. Is to be watchful for unique things that are done in that setting or unique ways of relating or whatever it is, things that stand out, and then to get curious about them in terms of asking God if they have significance, but then also just asking the people themselves about them. Those are my stories about the training and the vetting and the starting out into a contract. I'll stop there. I don't ever really want to make, it's 26 minutes already, so that's long enough. And I'll stop there, and then maybe a little bit later I'll do a third, start on the third segment.